Brian, my ex-husband, wasn't just difficult. He was a toxic, controlling narcissist in every sense of the word. Our marriage had been a nightmare, and our divorce wasn't any better. Still, I try to handle things fairly for the sake of our kids. I agreed to split custody evenly, and even gave him decision-making authority, foolishly hoping that he would step up as a father. For a while, it seemed like things were settling. After the divorce, I met Tom. He was everything Brian wasn't: kind, patient, and genuinely caring. He treated my kids like they mattered and wanted to be part of their lives without overstepping. I felt like I'd finally caught a break. But when Brian found out Tom planned to attend a fall festival at the kids' school, something snapped in him. The peace we had was gone, replaced by a calculated campaign of manipulation and control. Brian's hostility escalated quickly. First, he stopped watching the kids during my work hours, something he'd agreed to before. He claimed no one else could babysit unless he personally met and approved them. But whenever I tried to arrange a meeting, he refused. This left me scrambling to find childcare and even losing days of work. He wasn't just targeting me, his behavior was starting to hurt the kids, too. The nightly calls were another weapon. Brian insisted the kids call him every single night, which was fine in principle. But if we were busy, having dinner, running errands, or spending time together, and I suggested they call later, he would explode. The threats always followed. He'd sue me for violating the custody agreement. He began demanding to know where I was at all times when I had the kids. It felt like he was tracking my every move, waiting for an excuse to lash out. One morning, I went into work early to make up for time lost during a storm. Since it was so early, I let the kids stay home with Tom rather than waking them at 4:30 a.m. When Brian found out, he lost it. He accused me of violating the custody agreement and once again threatened to drag me to court. His threats didn't stop there. He refused to bring the kids to their Christmas play because Tom would be there. He fought me over their medical appointments, flat out refusing to pay his share, claiming he hadn't approved them. He even started withholding the kids during his custody time. Birthday parties, sleepovers with friends, family events, anything that might overlap with his time was out of the question. This was a sharp departure from how we'd handled things before, trading days when needed for the kids' benefit. Now, he used every opportunity to flex his control. After months of this relentless harassment, I reached my breaking point. I hated that Brian was willing to hurt our kids just to satisfy his ego. He kept waving the threat of court in my face, confident I wouldn't fight back. But he didn't realize I'd been keeping track of everything. This time, I was ready to fight fire with fire. Brian's behavior became a daily war of attrition, and I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Every time he threw a tantrum or made a threat, it wasn't just draining, it was exhausting for the kids, too. I decided it was time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. First, I needed to make sure Brian wouldn't be able to afford dragging me into court. He was on food stamps, something I knew he was only eligible for because he claimed to be paying his first ex-wife rent for the house he still lived in. But I also knew that wasn't true. His first ex-wife, who still owned half the house, hadn't seen a dime from him. I reached out to her and asked, directly, if he'd been paying her rent. As I suspected, she told me no. Armed with this information, I reported him to the Department of Children and Families, DCF. Within weeks, his food stamp card was canceled, and he was being sued for fraud. But the fallout didn't stop there. His first ex-wife, furious that he had been lying about paying her, turned around and filed a lawsuit to demand her half of the house's value. Brian, who was already struggling financially, was suddenly facing 2 lawsuits. While Brian was busy trying to put out those fires, I started building my own case. I knew he was using every loophole in the custody agreement to harass me. It was time to rewrite the rules. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. I had screenshots of his threatening texts where he raged about suing me or made demands about where I could take the kids. I saved a letter from his lawyer, written when he refused to watch the kids, stating that he was seeking new employment because I wasn't paying him. That letter alone was a golden ticket. If he tried to go for child support, I could prove he was capable of earning more. I kept medical records and receipts that showed I had been paying for everything for the kids, without any contribution from him. I had notes of the times he refused to let the kids attend events or even come to the Christmas play, all because Tom would be there. I documented conversations where he badmouthed me to the kids. I even had pictures of the kids looking disheveled and dirty when I picked them up from his house, evidence of the neglect he didn't seem to care about. With everything in order, I filed to modify the custody agreement. My goal wasn't to take the kids away from Brian entirely, it was to take away the power he had been abusing. The parts of the agreement he used to micromanage me, control childcare, and make life miserable, I wanted those gone. When Brian was served, I expected him to come out swinging. Instead, it was almost pitiful to see how quickly he folded. He didn't have the money to fight me in court, not with his food stamp fraud case and his ex-wife's lawsuit draining him dry. And once he saw the mountain of evidence I had against him, he knew he didn't stand a chance. But this wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure Brian couldn't keep using the kids as pawns in his ego game. I wanted to create a stable, peaceful environment for them, a life where their father's anger wouldn't dictate every decision. The custody hearing was the moment everything came to a head. When Brian and I faced each other in court, the air was thick with tension. I expected him to come prepared, to unleash the same intimidation tactics he'd used on me for months. Instead, he looked worn down, his confidence shaken. I presented my case calmly, backed by evidence I had spent weeks compiling. My lawyer laid it out methodically, starting with Brian's refusal to contribute to medical expenses. The receipts I'd kept showed I had covered everything, from checkups to prescriptions, without any help from him. The judge's expression grew colder with each piece of proof. Next came the screenshots of Brian's threats. My lawyer read them aloud, letting the court hear the venom in his words. Text after text showed his attempts to control my life. Threats to sue if I didn't answer his calls immediately, demands to know my exact location, and refusals to let the kids attend birthday parties or family events. Then there were the pictures of the kids, looking dirty and unkempt when I picked them up from his house. I explained how often they came home like that, how I'd had to take over basic care during my time with them. The evidence painted a clear picture. Brian's focus wasn't on being a good father, it was on making my life miserable. When Brian had his turn to defend himself, it was clear he hadn't anticipated the depth of my preparation. He fumbled through excuses, claiming I had exaggerated or taken things out of context. But he had no evidence to back him up. When questioned about why he hadn't paid his share of medical bills, he stammered something about not agreeing to the appointments. The judge didn't look impressed. The turning point came when my lawyer brought up the letter from Brian's attorney. It confirmed that Brian was capable of working but chose not to because he expected me to pay him instead. This undercut any argument he might have made for child support. Finally, my lawyer addressed the issue of childcare. Brian's refusal to let anyone else watch the kids had caused chaos in my life, and I had records of missed work and frantic attempts to find temporary care to prove it. When asked why he refused to approve babysitters but wouldn't meet them either, Brian had no real answer. By the end of the hearing, it was clear the court was on my side. The judge ruled in my favor, modifying the custody agreement to remove Brian's decision-making authority. I was free to arrange childcare without his interference, and his ability to use custody as a weapon against me was gone. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed Brian directly. They admonished him for his behavior, warning him that his actions were harming his children and that any further attempts at manipulation could result in him losing custody altogether. Brian didn't argue. He didn't even look at me as we left the courtroom. For the first time, I saw him defeated. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders for the first time in years. The battle with Brian had been exhausting, but I knew I had done what was necessary to protect my kids. The new custody agreement meant I could finally focus on providing them with stability and peace without constant interference. Brian kept a low profile after that. He didn't have the resources or leverage to fight back anymore. Between the fraud case, his first ex-wife's lawsuit, and the legal fees from our custody fight, he had no choice but to back down. The harassment stopped, and for once, the kids and I could breathe. The experience taught me an important lesson. Sometimes, standing up for what's right means preparing for a fight you didn't ask for. Brian had tried to control every part of my life through fear and manipulation, but in the end, his lies and ego were his undoing. Now, I focus on building a happier future for my kids. Tom continues to be a supportive and loving presence in our lives, and we're creating a home where the kids feel safe and loved. While I can't erase the damage Brian caused, I can ensure he never has the power to hurt us like that again. If you're dealing with a toxic ex or a custody battle, document everything. Keep records, take screenshots, and stay calm. The truth will carry weight when it matters most. Protect your peace and the well-being of your children, even if it means standing your ground against someone trying to intimidate you. If you found this story helpful or relatable, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel for more stories and advice on navigating tough situations. Let's face these challenges together.